Instead of a sermon this morning, we get a story. And the story is primarily for the shorter people here in church this morning. So this is for the kids, but it's a story for us adults too. So I see, where are our kids today? Raise your hands if you're here. Awesome, good. So I want to tell you a story this morning. And the funny thing about stories is sometimes there's happy stories, and sometimes there's sad stories. Christmas morning, on Christmas, we tell a happy story. We tell the story of Jesus being born. That's a happy story. This morning, we tell a sadder story. A story that maybe can make us cry, or maybe makes us feel a little sad. But I have good news before we tell our sadder story, is that our story this morning has a happy ending. So this story may seem dark. It may seem a little bit sad, but I promise, this story has a happy ending. So that's good. So we have our friend Jesus. And Jesus, we told that he was born, right? He was born in a manger, and he grew up. And over time, he went to church, and he learned everything he needed to know, and he was a young man, and he was smart, and he had a lot of friends, and they followed him around. And Jesus came to telling a lot of people kind of how they should live their life, that they should feed the hungry and give clothing to those who didn't have any clothing, and heal the sick. And a lot of people loved Jesus. But then there were some people who didn't really like Jesus because they made them feel funny inside, and he challenged them, and they didn't like him. And these people, they were kind of bad guys. You know how stories all have bad guys? They were just some people who just didn't like Jesus. And they didn't know what to do with Jesus, because the more Jesus taught and the more friends he made, he just became more and more exciting, and people wanted to follow him, and they said, this has to stop. And so the only thing they could think about doing was to kill him. And that was mean. And so they tracked Jesus, and they took him in front of this guy named Pilate, and they said, Pilate, here's Jesus. What are you going to do to him, huh? Thinking that Pilate would say, crucify him, which would mean they were going to hurt him quite badly. And instead, Pilate didn't want anything to do with it, because Pilate wasn't really that much of a bad guy. Pilate said, no, he's yours, you take care of him. And they said, no, you're in charge, you take care of him. And Pilate said, fine, if you really want to get rid of Jesus that badly, then that's what we're going to do. And so they decided to kill Jesus. And they hurt him, and his friends were sad, and his friends were a bit scared. But Jesus knew everything was okay, and Jesus knew this story had a happy ending. And so they made Jesus carry this cross, this big wooden cross on his shoulder, and Jesus would drag it through the streets up to a hill. And we know how hard it is to climb up a hill, right? So Jesus had this cross on top of his shoulders. And they put him on this cross. And they laughed at him, and they called him names. And they were mean. And even Jesus started to feel a little sad. Jesus thought that God maybe forgot about him. And I know there's times when we feel forgotten about, that we're having a bad day. And we think, come on, Mom and Dad, can we have a little help? But our mom and dad still love us, and they're still there, even though we might not know it. And this is the part where it gets a little sad. So Jesus, he couldn't take it anymore. And he breathed his last breath. And he said, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Even when they wanted to kill Jesus, Jesus forgave them, because he knew they weren't really bad guys. They just knew they were a little confused. And Jesus was there, and Jesus died. And then there was one soldier, one of the soldiers who thought he was there to kill Jesus. He saw everything that happened, and he knew right away what the mistake he made. He knew he made a mistake. He said, surely this was the King. This was the Son of Man. This was God. So right away, people knew they made a mistake. And they took Jesus off the cross, and all of his friends, we say, they beat their chests. They were so sad. And they wrapped Jesus up, and they put him in a tomb, and they closed it. And they went home because their friend was no longer there. That's where today ends. But I don't want to send you away like that, because I told you this story has a happy ending, right? What's next Sunday? Easter. And Easter's a good day, because we're not sad anymore that Jesus died. Because what happens on Easter? He came back to life. Who said that? Oh, right. Wait, he came back to life. That's right. And that's what happens. So today, we're a little bit sad because Jesus did die. And that did make us sad. But we only are sad today because we know that next week on Easter morning, when we come to church all dressed up in our Sunday best and excited and our bellies full of candy, we know that Jesus came back. So although there are days when we're really sad, and although there are days where we miss our friends, and we know there are days that we just think that we're alone, it's not true, because Jesus does come back. But for today, we just remember we're a little sad. And that's the story I wanted to tell you guys today. Amen?